When adults tell you that your eyes see things not meant to be seen, you learn that some truths are too dangerous to speak. That's how Dulce's silence began. You know how adults cushion hard truths with soft words. How they tell children that being different is a gift, that the universe has special plans for special souls. Dulce believed those words for 16 years. The night her grandparents bound her wrists was the night she finally understood. She wasn't being protected from the world. The world was being protected from her. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's get to the story. The famine had been creeping through their village for 3 months, turning fertile fields into dust and plump livestock into bones wrapped in hide. Dulce heard the whispers long before her grandparents spoke the words aloud. Heard them in the way conversations stopped when she entered a room, in the pregnant silences that followed her footsteps, in the careful distance neighbors kept when passing their cottage. She sat in the corner of their cramped home now, feeling the weight of their stares even though she couldn't see them. Her grandmother's breathing was shallow and rapid. Her grandfather's boots scraped against the dirt floor in that restless pattern he made when wrestling with difficult decisions. The season of offering begins tomorrow. Her grandmother's voice finally broke the silence, thin as parchment. The village elders say the spirits are angry. Dulce's fingers stilled on the rough wool she'd been carding. Everyone in their village knew what the season of offering meant, knew the stories of ancient tributes left at the forest altar, of bargains struck with powers older than memory. They say, her grandfather added slowly, each word deliberate, that this year's tribute must be pure, untouched by the ordinary world. Dulce's heart began to pound. She'd lived 16 years behind these walls, sheltered and isolated. They'd told her it was for her own protection, that her pale, sightless eyes would frighten people, that she was too precious, too special to risk in the cruel outside world. Now she understood the real reason they'd kept her hidden. "You've always been touched by something beyond," her grandmother continued, and Dulce could hear the tears thickening her voice. "Born with eyes that see what shouldn't be seen. The spirits marked you from the beginning, child. Perhaps they're simply calling you home." "No." The word escaped Dulce's lips before she could stop it. Her grandfather's boots moved closer. She could smell the wood smoke on his clothes, the familiar scent of the pine soap her grandmother made. These were the people who had raised her, who had taught her to navigate their cottage by counting steps, who had held her through nightmares and illness. These were the people who had decided she was the price for their survival. "It's already decided," her grandfather said, and there was something broken in his voice that told Dulce he'd been crying too. The elders agreed. A life untouched by the world, given freely to the spirits. In exchange, the rains will return. The crops will grow. The village will survive. Freely. Dulce's voice came out sharper than she intended. "I'm 16. I have no voice in the village council. Have no vote. How is this free?" Silence answered her. The kind of silence that confirmed every terrible suspicion. "You've always known you were different," her grandmother said softly, desperately. "You've always felt things others couldn't, seen shadows where there should be light, heard whispers in empty rooms. Maybe this is your purpose, Dulce. Maybe this is why you were born the way you were. Born the way she was. Blind, cursed. A daughter who brought misfortune with every breath." Dulce had heard the other versions of these beliefs whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. How her birth had killed their only son, her father. How her mother had fled the village in shame rather than raise a child marked by darkness. How mirrors cracked in her presence. How animals whimpered and fled. How even the bravest hunters crossed to the other side of the path rather than pass too close to their cottage. She'd spent 16 years trying to be small enough, quiet enough, good enough to erase the stain of her existence. It had never been enough. The journey to the forest altar happened in the deepest part of night, when even the moon hid behind clouds as if ashamed to witness what was about to unfold. They didn't speak as they walked. Her grandmother held one arm, her grandfather the other, guiding her through paths she'd never been allowed to travel. Dulce's wrists were already bound with rough hemp rope. "Tradition," her grandfather had mumbled while tying the knots, though his hands had shaken. She could sense the forest growing closer even before the temperature dropped. The air changed, became thicker, older, filled with the scent of moss and decay and something else, something that made her skin prickle with awareness. "The altar is just ahead," her grandmother whispered, and Dulce heard the grief in every syllable. We'll say the proper words. We'll tell the spirits how precious you are, how willing." "Don't," Dulce interrupted. Her voice was steady now, flat. "Don't lie to them too. They'll know. Whatever they are, they'll know I'm not willing. They'll know you're trading me for rain." Her grandmother's sob was the only answer. The stone altar was exactly as cold as Dulce had imagined it would be. They laid her down gently, arranged her bound hands across her chest like a corpse being prepared for burial. Her grandmother pressed a kiss to her forehead. Her grandfather touched her cheek with trembling fingers. "Forgive us," he breathed. "Forgive us, child." Then their footsteps retreated, growing fainter and fainter until Dulce was alone with the darkness that had always been her constant companion. She didn't cry. She'd learned long ago that tears changed nothing. Instead, she lay perfectly still on the stone and listened to the forest breathe around her. The rustle of leaves, the distant call of night birds, the whisper of wind through ancient branches. "At least it's over," she thought with strange, bitter relief. "At least I won't have to pretend anymore that I belong somewhere I never did." The forest seemed to hold its breath in response. Then she heard them. Hoofbeats, multiple horses moving fast through the undergrowth. The jingle of armor. The low, urgent voices of soldiers on patrol. "My lord, there's something ahead." "I see it." The second voice cut through the night like a blade through silk, cold, commanding, absolutely devoid of mercy. "Someone's left an offering." Dulce's breath caught. This wasn't a forest spirit. This was something far more dangerous. This was human. The hoofbeats stopped. She heard the creak of leather as someone dismounted, the crunch of boots on fallen leaves approaching the altar. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but the ropes held her bound and she had nowhere to go even if she could flee. A shadow fell across her face. She felt it more than saw it, a sudden cooling of the air, a presence that made her very bones vibrate with recognition of power. "Who did this to you?" The voice was directly above her now, and though it remained hard as winter frost, something beneath it made her shiver for entirely different reasons. Dulce opened her mouth but couldn't find words. "How did you explain 16 years of being unwanted to a stranger in the dark?" Warm fingers touched her cheek, surprisingly gentle despite the roughness of calluses. The moment they made contact, something rippled through the air around them, something cold and writhing and angry that Dulce's other senses caught even though she couldn't see it. Shadows. Living shadows that twisted around this man like serpents, that whispered in voices too low for normal hearing, that pressed against her awareness with desperate, hungry attention. She gasped and jerked back instinctively. The man above her went absolutely still. "You can sense them," he said, and there was something like shock in that frozen voice. "How?" I don't know what you mean, my lord. Don't lie." The command was sharp. "You reacted the instant I touched you. You felt the darkness move. No one has ever." He stopped, and she heard him take a slow, controlled breath. "No one has ever perceived them before." Dulce's mind raced. The shadows her grandparents had always warned her about, the things she felt moving at the edges of her awareness, the presences that made her skin crawl in certain places at certain times, they were real. And this man, whoever he was, carried them like a cloak. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Alpha King Braxton." The title fell like stones into deep water. "And you're coming with me." Before she could protest, he cut through her ropes with a blade she never saw coming. Then strong arms lifted her from the altar as if she weighed nothing at all, and Dulce found herself cradled against armor that still held the warmth of a living body beneath the cold metal. "My lord," one of the soldiers said nervously, "is it wise to bring her to the castle? She could be a trap left by." "She's no trap," Braxton interrupted. "She's something far more interesting." His arms tightened around her fractionally. She's the first person in a decade who can perceive what hunts me. As they rode away from the altar, Dulce pressed against the king's chest and tried to make sense of what had just happened. She'd been sacrificed to spirits that didn't exist, saved by a king who shouldn't have been in these woods, and now she was being carried toward a fate she couldn't begin to imagine. But beneath her ear, she could hear Braxton's heartbeat, steady and strong and achingly human. And around them both, the shadows writhed and whispered her name in voices like wind through dead leaves. Dulce, Dulce, Dulce. She didn't know yet that the darkness calling her name was the same curse that would nearly destroy them both, or that her blindness would become the only sight that mattered. All she knew was that for the first time in her life, someone had chosen to save her instead of sacrifice her, even if that someone might be more dangerous than any spirit her grandparents had ever feared. The castle rose from the northern cliffs like a crown of thorns, all sharp angles and bitter stone, defiant against the sea wind that battered its walls. Dulce couldn't see it, but she felt it the moment they passed through the outer gates. The sudden absence of warmth, the way sound changed quality in vast spaces, the cold that seeped up from ancient foundations and settled into mortal bones. "Careful on the steps," Braxton said, his hand steady at her elbow as he guided her from the courtyard. His voice had changed since they'd left the forest, grown more distant, more controlled, as if the closer they came to his seat of power, the further he retreated behind walls of his own making. Dulce's feet found marble instead of dirt, and the echo of her footsteps told her they'd entered something massive. A great hall, perhaps, or an entrance chamber built to humble visitors with its scale. The air tasted of old stone and beeswax candles and something else, something like ozone before a lightning strike, electric and wrong. "My lord!" A woman's voice rang out, sharp with barely concealed alarm. "You've returned early. We didn't expect." The words died abruptly. Dulce knew the exact moment the speaker noticed her, felt the weight of that stare like a physical thing, heard the intake of breath that meant shock, disgust, or fear. She'd learned to read those reactions before she could read anything else. "Prepare the East Tower guest chamber," Braxton commanded. "And send for healer Marin. I want this girl examined for injuries." "My lord," the woman said carefully, "perhaps it would be wiser to house her in the servants' quarters until we know more about what she is." "She is a guest under my protection." Braxton's voice dropped to something that made Dulce's spine straighten instinctively. "And she will be treated as such. Or would you prefer to explain your objections in greater detail?" Silence. Then rustling fabric, a curtsy perhaps. "Of course, my lord. Forgive my presumption. The chamber will be ready within the hour." Footsteps retreated, but Dulce heard others approaching. Curious servants, guards, courtiers perhaps. She felt their eyes like brands against her skin. "She's blind," someone whispered, not quite quietly enough. "Look at her eyes, pale as death." "Spirit touched," another voice hissed. "My grandmother always said those born without sight walk between worlds. They see things that shouldn't be seen. The king brings a witch to court. No, worse, a harbinger. Mark my words, she'll bring misfortune to us all." Dulce's hands clenched at her sides. 16 years of these whispers and they still had the power to cut. She'd been a fool to think that leaving her village might mean leaving the judgment behind. Braxton's hand found the small of her back, a gesture so subtle the onlookers probably didn't notice, but Dulce felt the steadiness in it, the silent message, "You're not alone." Anyone who spreads such superstitious nonsense will find themselves assigned to the northern watchtowers, Braxton announced to the assembled crowd, where they'll have plenty of time in the cold to reflect on the difference between fact and folklore. "This girl is under my personal protection. That should be the only fact that concerns you." The whispers died, but Dulce could still feel the fear radiating from the servants as Braxton led her through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. Their footsteps echoed strangely here, her single soft tread and his heavier boots creating rhythms that bounced off walls she couldn't see but could map by sound alone. 3 lefts, 2 rights, up a spiral staircase that curved for what felt like miles. The air grew colder as they climbed, until Dulce could see her breath misting. Actually see it, the one visual phenomenon her damaged eyes could still perceive. "This is the East Tower," Braxton explained as they finally stopped. She heard the groan of heavy hinges, smelled the mustiness of a room long unused. "It's isolated from the main castle. Quiet. I thought you might prefer that." Dulce stepped inside cautiously. Her fingers found stone walls, then tapestries, thick, heavy fabric that muffled sound. A fireplace dominated one wall. She could feel its cold mouth gaping at her. Furniture in careful arrangement. Bed, table, chairs, everything positioned with geometric precision. "No one has stayed here in years," Braxton continued, and something in his voice made her think he was watching her carefully. "But it's the safest room in the castle. Only one entrance, and I'll post guards who answer directly to me." "Safe from what?" Dulce asked quietly. She heard him move to the window, heard the scrape of curtain rings, the rush of wind that meant he'd opened shutters. "From people who fear what they don't understand. From courtiers who see opportunity in every stranger. From—" He stopped abruptly. "From you," Dulce finished. The silence stretched so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice had gone flat, emotionless. "Yes, from me." Before she could respond, rapid footsteps echoed in the corridor. A woman swept into the room, bringing with her the scent of herbs and clean linen. "My lord, I came as quickly as I could. Where is the patient?" "This is healer Marin," Braxton said. "She's been with the castle since before I was born. If anyone can be trusted, it's her." "Blessed ancestors," Marin breathed, and Dulce heard her approach. Gentle hands took Dulce's face, tilting it toward light that Dulce couldn't see. "Child, what happened to you? Those rope burns on your wrists, the bruises. Who did this?" "Her own family," Braxton said before Dulce could answer. "Left her bound at the forest altar as a sacrifice." Marin's hands stilled. "A sacrifice? But the old ways haven't been practiced in." She stopped. Oh, I see. Do you?" Braxton's voice had gone cold again. "Because I'm still trying to understand how anyone could." He cut himself off with visible effort. "Just examine her. Make sure she's not seriously hurt." The healer worked in silence for several minutes, checking Dulce's pulse, examining her wrists, asking gentle questions about pain or dizziness. Finally she stepped back. "Physically, she's malnourished and exhausted, but nothing that rest and good food won't heal. Emotionally." Marin paused. "Well, that's not something I can treat with herbs." "Thank you, Marin. See that she receives dinner and anything else she needs." The healer hesitated. "My lord, I should warn you, the servants are already talking. They say she's blind, that she sees spirits, that—" "I'm aware of what they say," Braxton interrupted. "And I don't care." After Marin left, Dulce heard Braxton pacing, 3 steps to the window, 4 steps back, the rhythm of a caged animal. She could feel his restlessness growing as the light changed quality in the room, as whatever served him for sunset approached. "You should rest," he said abruptly. "We can talk more tomorrow." "What happens at sunset?" Dulce asked. His pacing stopped. "What makes you think something happens? You're different now than you were in the forest. And like you're bracing for pain." She turned toward where she thought he stood. "The shadows I felt around you earlier, they're getting stronger, aren't they? As the sun sets." The silence that followed felt dangerous. "How can you possibly know that?" Braxton's voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know. Just feel them. The same way I've always felt things others couldn't. It used to get me punished when I was young. I'd tell my grandparents about the cold spots in certain rooms, or the whispers in empty corners, or the pressure that built before storms. They'd beat me for lying, for trying to frighten them with made-up stories." Dulce wrapped her arms around herself. "Eventually I learned to stop talking about it." She heard him move closer, felt his presence like heat against her skin. "Describe what you feel. Right now. Don't hold back." Dulce closed her eyes, a useless gesture, but one that helped her concentrate. There's something around you. Multiple somethings. They're coiled like snakes but made of cold instead of flesh. They whisper constantly, too low for normal hearing, but I can catch pieces. Name. Words in languages I don't recognize. He shivered. And they're hungry. They want something from you. Something vital. Braxton's breath came out in a rush. No one has ever been able to describe them before. My advisors think I'm mad or cursed by guilt. The physicians tried to bleed the delusions out of me. Even Marin thinks it's just stress and sleeplessness manifesting as hallucinations. But you know they're real. I know they're real, he confirmed. They've haunted me for 10 years. Every sunset to every sunrise. They steal my sight and replace it with visions of shadow creatures that claw at my sanity. During the day I'm fine. A normal king with normal problems. But at night. He laughed bitterly. At night, I'm blind in ways you could never understand. And I see horrors you can't imagine. Dulce's throat tightened. That's why you brought me here. Because I can sense them. Because you're the first person in a decade who might actually believe me, Braxton corrected. The first person who might be able to help me understand what they are and why. He broke off with a sharp gasp. Dulce felt it at the same instant, the shadows surging forward like a wave, writhing around Braxton with renewed intensity. She heard him stagger, heard his breathing turn ragged. Braxton! She reached out instinctively, her fingers finding his arm. The moment she made contact, the shadows recoiled with a sound like steam escaping under pressure. Braxton went still. What did you just do? I don't know. I just touched you and they. Dulce kept her hand on his arm, fascinated despite her fear. She could feel the shadows pressing close but not quite touching where her skin met his. They don't like it. When I touch you they can't get as close. Do it again, Braxton commanded. Touch my face. Dulce hesitated, then slowly raised her hand to where she thought his face might be. Her fingers found a strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, skin that radiated heat despite the cold of the shadows surrounding him. She traced upward carefully until she found his temple, his forehead, the tension lines that spoke of years of pain. The shadows writhed and hissed but retreated further. Incredible, Braxton breathed. I can still see them, but they're diminished, weaker. How are you doing this? I'm not doing anything. I'm just... Dulce started to pull back, but Braxton's hand came up to cover hers, keeping her palm pressed against his face. Don't. Not yet. This is the clearest my vision has been at sunset in years. His voice cracked slightly. I can almost see normally. I can almost see. He stopped. I can see you. Dulce's breath caught. What do I look like? Then very quietly. Brave. You look brave. Something warm and painful bloomed in Dulce's chest. No one had ever called her brave before. Cursed, defective, shameful, yes. But never brave. Talk to me, Braxton said suddenly. Your voice, when you speak, they quiet. Like they're listening. So Dulce talked. She told him about the forest altar, about the cold of the stone beneath her back, about the moment she'd heard his horses and thought her life was ending only to discover it might just be beginning. She talked about the things she'd sensed her whole life, the whispers and cold spots and inexplicable knowing that had made her family fear her. And as she spoke, she felt the shadows around them settle, not vanishing but becoming less agitated, less hungry. Still there, still dark, but almost peaceful. They're listening to you, Braxton confirmed, wonder in his voice. They've never done this before. Never responded to anything except their own hunger. What do they want? Dulce asked. I don't know. But they whisper your name now, alongside mine. Braxton's hand tightened over hers. Which means you're in danger. Whatever curse binds them to me, it's reaching for you too. Then we figure out what they are, Dulce said with more confidence than she felt. And we break it. Together. Braxton made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. You've been here less than a day, you don't know me. And you're already volunteering to fight a curse that's destroyed every healer, priest, and scholar who's tried to understand it. You saved my life, Dulce said simply. And you're the first person who's ever listened when I talked about the things I sense. That's worth fighting for. The shadows swirled one more time, then slowly began to fade as Braxton's breathing steadied. Dulce felt them retreat not into nothing, but into waiting, coiled beneath the surface of reality, watching, biding their time until the next sunset. I should go, Braxton said, but he didn't release her hand immediately. You need rest, and I need to think about everything you've told me. Will you come back? Dulce asked. Tomorrow night, when the shadows return. Yes. No hesitation. If you're willing to endure them again. I've endured worse things than shadows, Dulce said. I've endured being unwanted. She felt him stiffen. Then his free hand came up to cup her other cheek, cradling her face between his palms. You are not unwanted here, Dulce. I want you to understand that. Whatever happens, however this ends, you are not unwanted. Then he was gone, his footsteps retreating down the spiral stairs, leaving Dulce alone in a room that suddenly felt too large and too quiet. She made her way to the bed carefully, finding the edge of the mattress and sitting down on blankets softer than any she'd ever touched. Guards took up positions outside her door. She could hear their armor settling, their quiet conversation. You think she's really dangerous? One of them asked. The king seems to think she's important, the other replied. That's all that matters to us. Dulce lay back against the pillows and stared up at darkness that was no different with her eyes open or closed. For the first time in her life, she'd met someone who saw her as something other than a curse to be hidden or a burden to be discarded. She'd met someone who needed her. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like the first deep breath after years of drowning. Somewhere in the castle below, she knew Braxton was thinking the same thing she was, that she might be the key to breaking his curse. But Dulce knew something he didn't yet, something she'd learned from 16 years of being treated as broken. Using someone to fix yourself didn't end in freedom. It ended in chains of a different kind. If she was going to help him, it would have to be because she chose to, not because he needed her to. The difference was small but vital. And as sleep finally claimed her, Dulce smiled into the darkness and made herself a promise. She would never again be a sacrifice. Not to spirits, not to kings, and not even to the shadows that whispered her name like a prayer and a curse all at once. The pattern established itself within days. As natural as breathing and just as necessary. Each evening, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Braxton would arrive at Dulce's chamber. She always heard him coming. His footsteps had a particular rhythm she'd learned to recognize, purposeful but slightly hesitant, as if he was still convincing himself he had the right to seek her out. They're gathering already, he'd say by way of greeting. I can feel them circling. And Dulce would reach for him. Sometimes his hand, sometimes his arm, once even his face when the shadows came on particularly strong, and she would describe what her blindness allowed her to perceive. There are more tonight, she said on the 5th evening, her fingers resting lightly against his wrist. 7. No, 8 distinct presences. They're agitated. Something has them restless. The council meeting, Braxton said through gritted teeth. She could feel the tension vibrating through him as the shadows pressed closer. They want me to marry, to produce an heir. The debate went on for hours, and I could feel the curse feeding on my anger the entire time. They feed on emotion. Strong emotion. Especially anger, fear, hatred. Braxton's hand turned beneath hers, his fingers intertwining with her own. Tell me what else you sense. Your voice helps. It always helps. So Dulce closed her eyes, useless but focusing, and let her awareness expand into the space around them. The largest one coils around your shoulders like a cloak. It's the oldest, I think. The coldest. The others defer to it. She tilted her head, listening to whispers only she could hear. It's saying your name over and over. Braxton. Braxton. Like it's trying to remember something it's forgotten. What else? His voice was strained but steadier than before. What else do they say? Dulce hesitated. The shadows were whispering other things too. Her name, spoken with an intensity that made her skin prickle. But she wasn't ready to tell him that yet, wasn't ready to admit that whatever hunted him was also reaching for her. They're curious, she said instead. About me. They want to understand why I can perceive them when no one else can. You and me both, Braxton murmured. His thumb traced absent patterns against her palm, and Dulce wondered if he realized he was doing it. Every scholar I've consulted, every priest and healer and supposed expert, none of them could even confirm the shadows existed. They thought I was describing metaphors for guilt or madness. But you, he broke off. You describe them so precisely. Down to the way they move, the patterns they form. How? I've been perceiving things others couldn't my entire life, Dulce said quietly. My grandparents called it lying. The village healer said I had an overactive imagination brought on by my blindness, that I was inventing stimuli to compensate for what I couldn't see. But I always knew it was real. The cold spots in certain corners, the whispers in empty rooms, the sensation of being watched by things that had no bodies. She squeezed his hand. Maybe I was born this way to help you. Maybe that's why. Don't. Braxton's voice turned sharp. Don't make your suffering into some grand purpose. You weren't born to be a tool for my salvation, Dulce. You were born to be a person. What was done to you was wrong, regardless of whether it led you here. The fierce protectiveness in his tone made Dulce's throat tight. No one has ever said that to me before. Then everyone you've known before was a fool. They sat in silence for a moment, hands clasped, while the shadows writhed and settled around them. Dulce could feel them watching, waiting, drawn to the connection forming between king and castaway. Can I ask you something? Dulce ventured. Anything. Why do you rule through fear? Everyone in the castle is terrified of you. Servants whisper about your cruelty. Guards flinch when you raise your voice. But you're not cruel. Not with me at least. So why the reputation? Braxton was quiet for so long that Dulce thought she'd overstepped. Then, because fear is simpler than truth. If my people fear me, they don't question me. They don't look too closely at why I sequester myself every night, why I sometimes emerge in the morning looking like I haven't slept, why I avoid all evening events and ceremonies. Fear keeps them at a distance where they can't see the curse slowly devouring me. You're protecting them, Dulce realized. By making them think you're a monster, you're hiding the real monster inside you. Something like that. His hand tightened around hers. Though I'm not sure I can claim such noble motives. Mostly I'm just tired. Tired of pretending to be whole when I'm fractured. Tired of ruling a kingdom when I can barely rule my own mind half the time. Tired of being alone with this. You're not alone anymore, Dulce said softly. She felt him turn toward her, felt the weight of his gaze even though she couldn't see it. No, he agreed. I'm not. The discovery happened by accident 3 nights later. Dulce had been fidgeting with a small stone she'd found near the window. Smooth river rock that someone must have brought up from the valley below. She'd been rolling it between her fingers while describing the shadows to Braxton, using the familiar texture to ground herself while her other senses reached into the supernatural. That's odd, Braxton said suddenly. What? The stone. Glowing. Faintly, but definitely glowing. Dulce held it up, felt the warmth radiating from it. I've been holding it for a while. Maybe it absorbed heat from my hand. Let me see. Braxton took the stone from her, and Dulce heard his sharp intake of breath. It's not just warm. There's light coming from it. Soft golden light. And the shadows, they're avoiding it. Giving it a wide berth like it might burn them. That's impossible. So is a blind girl who can see curses, Braxton countered. Here, touch this. He pressed a different object into her hand, a silver coin cold from his pocket. Hold it for a moment. Dulce clasped the coin, feeling it warm gradually against her palm. After a minute, Braxton took it back. Same thing, he confirmed. It's glowing now. Faint but unmistakable. And the shadows are wary of it. Like it's anathema to them somehow. My touch makes objects repel the shadows. Dulce's mind raced with the implications. Could we use that? Could we make enough objects to what? Fill the castle with glowing stones. But Braxton's voice held excitement despite the skepticism. Though the principle is interesting. Whatever quality you possess that weakens the shadows can apparently be transferred, at least temporarily. I wonder how long the effect lasts. They experimented for the next hour, Dulce touching various objects while Braxton catalogued their effects. A handkerchief glowed for roughly 20 minutes after she released it. A wooden carving held the light for nearly an hour. A small doll made of cloth and straw seemed to absorb her touch most effectively, radiating warmth and light that made the shadows hiss and retreat to the far corners of the room. Fascinating, Braxton murmured, turning the doll over in his hands. Organic materials hold the charge longer than metal or stone. And the more complex the object, the stronger the effect. You sound like a scholar, Dulce said, smiling. I was one before I became king. I studied at the university in the capital for 3 years before my father died and duty called me home. I miss it sometimes. The simple pursuit of knowledge without the weight of a crown. Tell me about it, Dulce urged. About who you were before all this. So he did. And as the shadows circled them like sharks sensing blood, Braxton told her about a younger version of himself who'd dreamed of mapping stars and understanding ancient languages. Who'd fallen asleep over books and woken with ink on his cheek. Who'd believed knowledge could solve any problem, right up until the curse proved some problems had no rational solutions. In exchange, Dulce told him about the stories she used to tell herself in the dark. Elaborate fantasies where she wasn't blind, where her family loved her, where she belonged somewhere. She confessed how pathetic those stories seemed now, how she'd clung to lies because reality was too painful. They're not pathetic, Braxton said fiercely. They're survival. You did what you had to do to endure impossible circumstances. That's not weakness, that's strength. Is that what you tell yourself? Dulce asked gently. When the curse makes you feel weak. His silence was answer enough. Let me see you, Dulce said suddenly. Really see you? May I? She heard him shift position, moving closer. What do you need me to do? Just hold still. Dulce raised her hands to his face, mapping the geography of him through touch. Strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, a nose that had been broken at least once. Thick eyebrows, deep-set eyes. A small scar cutting through his left eyebrow that suggested childhood mischief or adult violence. His hair was longer than she'd expected, curling slightly at the nape of his neck. She traced every feature carefully, building an image in her mind that was more complete than sight could ever provide. This close, she could feel the heat of his skin, smell the cedar soap he favored, sense the way his breath quickened as her fingers ghosted across his lips. Your turn, she whispered. My turn. Describe me. Never. I don't know what I look like. My grandparents removed all the mirrors and no one ever. Her voice cracked. No one ever thought it mattered enough to tell me. Braxton's hands came up to frame her face, mirroring her earlier gesture. You have your grandmother's bone structure, he began softly. High cheekbones, a stubborn chin. Your skin is pale, not sickly but like porcelain. Like you were carved from moonlight. His thumbs brushed her cheeks. You have freckles across your nose. 7 of them, scattered like constellation points. What about my eyes? Dulce asked, dreading the answer. They're pale gray, almost silver in certain light. And they're not empty like people seem to think blind eyes should be. They're expressive. Right now they're sad, and I hate that I'm the one who put that sadness there by reminding you that no one ever. He stopped, composing himself. You're beautiful, Dulce. Not in spite of your blindness or because of it. Just beautiful. Purely, simply, objectively beautiful. Dulce felt tears slide down her cheeks before she could stop them. Braxton's thumbs caught them gently. "I'm sorry," she managed. "I don't know why I'm crying." "Because someone finally saw you," Braxton said. "And told you the truth you should have heard years ago." They stayed like that for a long moment, foreheads pressed together, breathing the same air, while the shadows watched and whispered things neither of them wanted to acknowledge. The knock at the door shattered the moment like glass. "My lord." A guard's voice, apologetic but urgent. "The ambassador from the Southern Territories has arrived. He demands an audience." Braxton pulled back with visible reluctance. "I have to go. Political obligations wait for no one, not even kings being devoured by curses." "Will you come back tomorrow night?" Dulce asked, hating how desperate she sounded. "Every night," Braxton promised. "For as long as you'll have me." After he left, Dulce sat alone in her chamber and tried to process everything that had happened. The discovery of her touch affecting objects. The intimacy of their conversation. The way her heart had stuttered when his hands cradled her face. She was falling for him. The realization terrified her almost as much as the shadows did. The whispers started 2 days later. Dulce heard them as she made her way through the corridor with Marin, who'd taken to visiting daily under the guise of checking on her health. In reality, Dulce suspected the healer was lonely and appreciated having someone to talk to who didn't treat her like a relic from a bygone era. "The king is weak for her," a servant's voice drifted from an alcove. "Did you see how he cancelled the evening council session just to visit her chamber?" "Weak or bewitched?" another responded. "My cousin says she's cursed. That her blindness is a sign of dark magic, and now she's infected the king with it. Either way, the nobles are displeased. They're saying if he doesn't take a proper bride soon, they'll take matters into their own hands." Marin's hand tightened on Dulce's arm. "Ignore them," she muttered. "They're fools who wouldn't recognize genuine connection if it bit them." But Dulce couldn't ignore it. Because she knew what happened to inconvenient people in positions of power. She'd been one her entire life. That night, when Braxton arrived, she could sense the tension in him before he even spoke. "The Southern ambassador came with a proposal," he said without preamble. "A marriage alliance. His daughter, the Princess Alara, in exchange for military support and trade agreements that would secure the kingdom's prosperity for decades." Dulce's stomach dropped. "What did you tell him?" "That I'd consider it." Braxton's voice was hollow. "What else could I say? The council is pushing for it, the nobles are demanding it, and if I refuse without good reason, they'll start asking questions I can't answer." "You could tell them the truth," Dulce said quietly. "About the curse. And watch them panic. Watch them declare me unfit to rule. Watch rival factions tear the kingdom apart fighting for the throne." Braxton laughed bitterly. "No, the curse has to remain secret. Which means I have to play the political game even when it costs me." He stopped. "Costs you what?" Silence. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. "Everything that matters." Dulce felt the shadows gathering thick around them, agitated by his emotional turmoil. She reached for his hand instinctively, lending him what comfort her touch could provide. "If I were not king," Braxton said suddenly, his voice raw with something that sounded like desperation. "If I were just a man, with no crown and no curse and no duty to anyone but myself, could you stay by my side? Would you want to?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Dulce wasn't ready to face. Because the answer was yes. Of course it was yes. She'd spent mere weeks with him, and already he'd become the center of her world. The only person who'd ever truly seen her, who'd ever treated her like she mattered, who'd ever made her feel like being alive was something worth celebrating instead of apologizing for. But she also knew that, if I were not king, was a fantasy as elaborate as any story she'd told herself in the dark. He was king. He did have duties. And she was still the blind girl from a backwater village who'd been offered as a sacrifice. Hardly suitable material for a queen. Dulce began, then stopped because she didn't know how to finish the sentence without breaking both their hearts. The shadows chose that moment to surge forward with unusual violence. Braxton gasped, his hand crushing hers as the curse flooded through him with unprecedented strength. "Braxton, what's wrong?" "The shadows," he managed through gritted teeth. "They're speaking. All at once. Louder than I've ever heard them." "What are they saying?" But Braxton had gone rigid, his entire body locked in place as if paralyzed. Dulce could feel the shadows pressing close, could hear their whispers rising to a crescendo that made her teeth ache. And in that cacophony, she finally heard it clearly, the words they'd been speaking all along. "Vessel, vessel. The vessel. She is the vessel." "Braxton!" Dulce shook him. "What does that mean? Why are they calling me a vessel?" His hand released hers abruptly, and she heard him stagger backward. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. Too controlled. "Nothing. They're just confused. They say many things that don't make sense." He was lying. Dulce knew it with the same certainty she knew when shadows were present or when danger approached. Whatever the shadows had revealed, it had terrified him. "You should rest," Braxton continued in that same false calm voice. "I'll return tomorrow night." "Braxton, please." "Tomorrow, Dulce. I promise." Then he was gone, practically fleeing from her chamber, leaving Dulce alone with the dying echoes of shadow whispers and the terrible certainty that whatever truth he'd just learned, he was willing to lie to protect her from it. She pressed her hands against her face, felt the warmth of her own touch, and wondered what it meant to be called a vessel by creatures made of darkness and hunger. And she wondered if Braxton would push her away to save her, just like everyone else had pushed her away to save themselves. The thought hurt worse than any curse could. The first night Braxton didn't come, Dulce told herself it was political obligations. A crisis that required his attention, perhaps, or meetings that ran late into the evening. She sat by the window listening to the sounds of the castle settling into darkness, feeling the shadows gather as they always did at sunset, and waited. He didn't come. The second night, she told herself he was ill. The curse had taken its toll and he needed rest. She traced the stone he'd given her days ago, still faintly warm from her constant handling, and imagined him recovering in his chambers, promising himself he'd visit tomorrow. He didn't come. By the third night, Dulce stopped making excuses. She'd been abandoned before. She knew what it felt like. The slow dawning realization that you'd mattered less than you thought, that whatever connection you'd imagined was one-sided, that you were once again too much trouble for too little reward. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. "He's been in meetings with the southern delegation," Marin said when she visited on the fourth day. The healer's voice was carefully neutral, but Dulce could hear the pity underneath. "Important matters of state. The kind of thing that consumes a king's attention." "Of course," Dulce said quietly. "I understand." She didn't understand, but she was tired of being pitted. The servants' whispers grew bolder as the days passed. They no longer bothered to lower their voices when Dulce walked by. "The princess arrived yesterday. Beautiful, they say. Golden hair and a voice like honey. The king has been entertaining her personally. Daily tours of the grounds, private dinners, long walks through the gardens. About time he came to his senses. That blind girl was clearly just a distraction, a curiosity, nothing more." Dulce kept her face blank and her steps steady, but each whisper was a knife between her ribs. She'd been a fool to think she was anything more than an interesting puzzle for Braxton to solve, a tool to understand his curse. A temporary fascination that lost its appeal once the novelty wore off. On the seventh night, Dulce finally heard his footsteps approaching her chamber. Her traitorous heart leapt before she could stop it. She stood quickly, smoothing her dress, preparing the words she'd practiced. Calm, dignified, not desperate. She wouldn't beg for explanations. She wouldn't embarrass herself by demanding why he'd vanished. The door opened. "Dulce." His voice was flat, emotionless. Nothing like the warmth she'd grown accustomed to. We need to talk. Yes, she agreed, proud of how steady she sounded. We do. She heard him move further into the room but maintain his distance. He didn't approach her. Didn't reach for her hand. The shadows were thick tonight. She could feel them swirling around him with unusual intensity, but he made no move to seek her touch. I've been thinking about our arrangement, Braxton began, each word carefully measured. And I've realized I made an error in judgment. Dulce's hands clenched at her sides. An error. You were useful initially. Your ability to perceive the shadows provided valuable information. But that usefulness has run its course. We've learned what we can learn from your condition. Her condition. Not her gift. Not her unique perception. Her condition like a disease to be studied and discarded. I see, Dulce said, though she didn't. She'd felt the connection between them, the way his breathing steadied when she touched him, the intimacy of their conversations. Had she imagined all of it? The political situation has changed, Braxton continued in that same awful, detached tone. The kingdom needs stability. The nobles need reassurance. I've made commitments I can't break. To Princess Ilara. Yes. No hesitation, no regret. The Southern Alliance is too important to jeopardize over a temporary fascination with a. He paused, and Dulce heard him take a controlled breath. With a blind peasant girl who was convenient when I needed distraction from my curse. The words landed like physical blows. Dulce felt her breath catch, felt tears burning behind her eyes that she absolutely refused to shed in front of him. You said I wasn't unwanted, she whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. You promised. I lied. Cold, brutal, final. I told you what you needed to hear to keep you compliant. To keep you describing the shadows. To keep you. He stopped. It doesn't matter. The point is, your presence here has become an inconvenience. The servants talk. The nobles question my judgment. Princess Ilara has made it clear that she won't tolerate any complications. Complications. Dulce tasted the word like poison. Is that what I am? You were a mistake, Braxton said, and something in his voice made Dulce think he was forcing the words out. A lapse in judgment I'm now correcting. Arrangements have been made for your relocation. You'll be given funds and safe passage to wherever you wish to go. Consider it compensation for your services. Services. Like she'd been hired help. Like the weeks of vulnerability and growing trust and tender moments had been nothing more than a transaction. When? Dulce managed. Tomorrow morning. Early. Before the castle wakes. It's better this way. Cleaner. Less chance of uncomfortable encounters. Less chance of him having to see her face when his guards dragged her away. Dulce stood frozen, trying to reconcile this cold stranger with the man who'd held her face and called her beautiful. The man who'd promised she'd never be punished again for being different. The man who'd looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his entire life. Was any of it real? The question escaped before she could stop it. The conversations, the way you... She cut herself off. Never mind. It doesn't matter. No, Braxton agreed quietly. It doesn't. She heard him turn to leave, heard his footsteps moving toward the door. The shadows followed him like a cloak, and for the first time since she'd met him, Dulce hoped they tormented him. Hoped they made him suffer the way he was making her suffer now. For what it's worth, Braxton said from the doorway, his back to her. I'm sorry. You deserved better than this. Then he was gone. Dulce stood alone in her chamber, the room that had become a sanctuary, the space where she'd felt seen for the first time in her life, and finally let the tears fall. She'd been right all along. The stories she'd told herself about being wanted, about mattering, about finding someone who valued her, they were just fairy tales. And fairy tales, as she'd learned long ago, were the most dangerous lies of all. The guards came at dawn. They were courteous, almost apologetic. As they escorted Dulce through corridors she'd learned to navigate by sound and sensation. No one else stirred at this hour. Braxton had timed her departure to avoid witnesses, to erase her presence from the castle as cleanly as possible. Marin was waiting in the courtyard, her face drawn and angry. "This is wrong," the healer said fiercely, pressing a pouch of herbs and coins into Dulce's hands. "Whatever he told you, whatever he said, this is wrong." "It's fine," Dulce lied. "I was never meant to stay." "That's not true and you know it. I've seen the way he looks at you, the way he—" Marin stopped, glancing at the guards. "Just know that not everyone thinks you're disposable, child. Some of us see what you are." What she was. Blind girl. Cast off. Mistake. The cart journey away from the castle was silent except for the creak of wheels and the steady clip of horse hooves. Dulce sat alone in the back, clutching Marin's pouch, feeling the castle disappear behind her with every passing moment. She'd made it perhaps 3 miles when the cart suddenly stopped. "What's wrong?" Dulce asked the driver. "Someone in the road, miss." "Just a moment." Dulce heard footsteps approaching, light, deliberate, belonging to someone who moved with purpose. Then a hand touched her arm gently. "Forgive the dramatic timing," a woman's voice said, "but we need to talk. Away from the castle walls." "Who are you?" "Someone who knows the truth about what happened to you." The woman helped Dulce down from the cart. "And someone who needs you to understand that your sacrifice was never about spirits or ancient rituals." Dulce's blood went cold. "What do you mean?" "Walk with me. Your driver has been compensated for his discretion." They moved off the road into the forest. Dulce could hear the rustle of leaves, smell the dampness of morning dew, feel the uneven ground beneath her feet. The woman kept a steady hand on her elbow, guiding her carefully. "My name is Lyra," the woman said. "I'm part of a network that monitors supernatural threats to the kingdom. We've been tracking King Braxton's curse for years." "Then you know about the shadows." "We know about many things, including the fact that your grandparents didn't sacrifice you to a forest spirit." Lyra's voice hardened. "They sacrificed you to feed the king's curse." Dulce stopped walking. "That's impossible. My grandparents were superstitious, but they didn't know anything about Braxton or—" "They were paid." Lyra cut her off. "Handsomely. By agents working for the Alara family, the southern nobility that's been maneuvering to weaken Braxton's position for years. They discovered that his curse responds to certain triggers, certain energies. And they realized that people born with heightened supernatural perception, people like you, could be used to amplify the curse's power." "No." Dulce shook her head. "That doesn't make sense. My touch weakens the shadows, it doesn't." "Initially, yes. Your touch does weaken them. But prolonged exposure creates a connection. The curse learns from you, adapts to you, begins to recognize you as a potential." Lyra paused. "Vessel." The word hit Dulce like ice water. The shadows had been whispering it for weeks. Braxton had heard it too. Had gone pale when they'd spoken it aloud. "The Alara family has been searching for someone like you for years," Lyra continued. "Someone born with the right combination of perceptive abilities and vulnerability. They found you in your village, arranged for the famine through poisoned wells, and paid your grandparents to perform the sacrifice at a location they knew Braxton's patrol would pass. They wanted him to find me." Dulce's voice was hollow. "They wanted you inside the castle, close to him, building a connection with the curse so that when the time was right, they could trigger a transformation that would expose his weakness to the entire kingdom. Discredit him. Force the nobles to remove him from power." Lyra's hand tightened on Dulce's arm. "The wedding to Princess Alara isn't about alliance, Dulce. It's about positioning. Once they're married, once Alara has legal claim to the throne, they'll activate whatever magic they've been weaving around you and watch Braxton destroy himself publicly." Dulce felt like she might be sick. "He knew. Braxton knew I was dangerous to him. That's why he pushed me away. Perhaps. Or perhaps he was simply doing what they wanted, removing you from the castle before you could warn anyone or interfere with their plans." Lyra's voice softened. "I don't know the king's heart, child. I can't tell you if his feelings were real or manipulated. But I know this. The Alara family is planning something for the wedding ceremony. Something that will require your presence to fully activate. And if you leave now, if you run away believing Braxton betrayed you, you'll be exactly where they want you, safe from interference while they destroy him. Why are you telling me this? Dulce asked. What do you want from me? The same thing I've always wanted. To protect this kingdom from those who would exploit supernatural forces for political gain. Lyra stepped back. What you do with this information is your choice. You can keep running. Find a village far from here and build a new life. Forget King Braxton and his curse and the conspiracy swirling around you. You'd be justified. You owe him nothing, especially if he did push you away to save himself. Or you can return to the castle during the wedding ceremony. And if the Alara family tries what I think they will, you can stop them, because you're the only one who can perceive what they're doing. Lyra's footsteps moved away. Either way, you deserve to make the choice with full knowledge. Not in ignorance. Not as a pawn. Wait, Dulce called out. How do I know you're telling the truth? How do I know this isn't another manipulation? But Lyra was already gone, leaving Dulce alone in the forest with the weight of impossible decisions and the echo of words that changed everything. You were never unwanted. You were targeted. All her life, Dulce had believed she was a curse that brought misfortune wherever she went. Now she learned the truth was somehow worse. She hadn't been cursed by fate. She'd been weaponized by design. And the man who'd pushed her away might have been trying to save her. Or might have been discarding her because her usefulness had ended. Or might have been caught in the same web of manipulation that had ensnared her from the beginning. Dulce sank down against a tree, pulled her knees to her chest, and tried to decide who she was if everything she'd believed about herself was a lie. The forest whispered around her, indifferent to her crisis. In the distance, she could hear the cart driver calling for her, probably worried about leaving the king's mistake alone in the woods. She thought about Braxton's hands framing her face. His voice calling her beautiful. The way he'd held her when the shadows pressed close. The promises he'd made before breaking them all. You were a mistake. But what if the only mistake had been believing that pushing her away would keep her safe? What if walking away now would ensure they both lost everything that mattered? Dulce stood slowly, brushing dirt from her dress, and made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She wasn't running. Not anymore. If the Alara family wanted to use her as a weapon against Braxton, they'd learn that weapons had a terrible tendency to turn on those who wielded them without respect. And if Braxton truly believed she was better off without him, he was about to discover that blind girls who'd survived sacrifice, rejection, and weaponization were not so easily dismissed. She started walking, not toward the waiting cart and the driver who would take her to some distant village. She walked back toward the castle, toward the wedding that would decide the fate of a cursed king and the kingdom he ruled, toward the choice that was finally truly hers to make. The village of Thornhaven suited Dulce precisely because no one there cared who she was. She rented a small room above the baker's shop, traded stories for meals, and spent her days transcribing the fairy tales she'd once told children for copper coins. The baker's wife, a practical woman named Greta, read them aloud to test their flow, and gradually, Dulce's words found their way into the hands of traveling merchants who sold them in distant markets. It was a quiet life. Safe life. It was utterly empty. Dulce told herself she was content. She had independence, modest income, and freedom from the complications of cursed kings and political conspiracies. She didn't think about Braxton's hands framing her face. Didn't wonder if he'd married Alara yet, if the curse had consumed him, if he ever regretted calling her a mistake. She was very good at not thinking about things that hurt. The announcement came on a crisp autumn morning, carried by a royal herald whose voice rang through the village square with practiced authority. By decree of His Majesty King Braxton, all citizens are invited to witness the royal wedding ceremony uniting the crown with Princess Alara of the southern provinces. The ceremony will take place at sunset on the autumn equinox, symbolizing the union of light and shadow, strength and grace, past and future. Dulce's hands stilled on the parchment she'd been working on. Sunset. They were holding the ceremony at sunset, the most dangerous time for Braxton, when the curse pressed closest, when the shadows grew bold and hungry. Romantic, isn't it? Greta said, startling Dulce from her thoughts. A sunset wedding. Very symbolic. Very stupid, Dulce muttered. What was that, dear? Nothing. Dulce forced her attention back to her story. Just thinking aloud. But she couldn't stop thinking about it. A sunset ceremony after a year of careful avoidance, after Braxton had structured his entire life around managing the curse's patterns. It made no sense unless someone wanted the curse to manifest publicly. Dulce spent 3 days trying to convince herself it wasn't her problem. Braxton had made his choice. He'd called her a mistake, pushed her away, chosen political advantage over whatever fragile connection they'd built. She owed him nothing. On the 4th day, she packed a small bag and told Greta she needed to visit the capital for research. Research? Greta repeated skeptically. For your fairy tales. Something like that. The older woman studied her with knowing eyes. Be careful, child. Some stories don't have happy endings. I know, Dulce said quietly. But I have to know which kind this one is. The capital was chaos. Dulce arrived 2 days before the wedding to find the streets packed with visitors, vendors, and celebration. She navigated by sound and memory, staying to the edges of crowds, keeping her face hidden beneath a hooded cloak. She had no plan beyond attending the ceremony and confirming that everything was normal, that her paranoia was unfounded, that she could finally put this chapter of her life behind her. She found a spot at the back of the crowd gathered in the castle's outer courtyard where the ceremony would take place. Thousands had assembled. Nobles in silk, merchants in their finest wool, peasants craning for a glimpse of royalty. Dulce pressed herself against a stone wall and waited. The sun began its descent. Something was wrong. Dulce felt it before she understood it. A wrongness in the air, a tension that had nothing to do with wedding anticipation. The shadows gathering around the courtyard were too dense, too eager. They whispered in voices that made her skin crawl. Dun, dun, dun. She extended her senses carefully, searching for Braxton. Found him at the front of the assembled crowd, standing rigid beside Princess Alara. Even from this distance, Dulce could feel his struggle. The curse pressed against him like a living thing, clawing for release. And he was fighting it with every breath, fighting it at sunset, during a public ceremony, while surrounded by thousands of witnesses. This wasn't just stupid. It was deliberate. Dulce pushed forward through the crowd, trying to get closer, but the press of bodies was too thick. She heard the ceremony beginning, a priest's sonorous voice reciting traditional vows, the crowd's reverent silence. Then she felt something else. Magic. Not the wild, chaotic energy of Braxton's curse, but something structured, intentional. Multiple sources working in concert, weaving patterns that converged on Braxton. Dulce's blood went cold. Lyra had been right. The Alara family was channeling something, using the ceremony as cover, and whatever they were doing was designed to amplify the curse's power. Force it to manifest. Make Braxton transform in front of everyone who mattered. She shoved harder through the crowd, ignoring protests, not caring about propriety. She had to reach him, had to warn him. A crossbow bolt whistled through the air. Dulce heard it an instant before impact. Heard the mechanical click of the release, the sharp slice of the bolt cutting air. Heard someone in the crowd gasp. Assassin! The scream tore through the courtyard. The king, protect the king. Chaos erupted. The crowd surged in panic, people shoving and stumbling over each other in their desperation to flee. Dulce was swept forward, nearly trampled, barely managing to keep her feet. She grabbed onto a pillar and held on as the human tide crashed around her. Through the screams and confusion, she heard Braxton's voice, strained, agonized. Get back. Everyone get back. I can't. The sun touched the horizon. The shadows exploded. Even without sight, Dulce felt the transformation. Felt the curse erupt from Braxton's body like a dam breaking, felt shadows condense into something solid and terrible and monstrous. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. The remaining crowd's screams took on a new pitch of terror. "Monster!" someone shrieked. "The king is cursed, the prophecies were true." Dulce pushed away from the pillar and ran toward the sound of Braxton's transformation. The crowd was fleeing in the opposite direction now, which made it easier, but she could feel the wrongness intensifying. The magic channeling into him wasn't stopping. It was feeding the transformation, making it worse, pushing the curse beyond anything Braxton had experienced before. "Stop!" Dulce screamed at no one and everyone. "You're killing him, stop!" No one listened. She heard armored guards shouting orders, heard the clash of steel being drawn, heard Princess Alara's voice raised in practiced distress. "Someone help him! The curse! It's consuming him!" Liar. She was part of this. Her family's magic was woven through every shadow currently tearing Braxton apart. Dulce broke through the final line of fleeing nobles and stumbled into the clearing around the ceremony platform. The shadows here were so thick they felt like physical barriers. She pushed through them, feeling them claw at her skin, and finally reached out. Her hand found something solid, warm, covered in what felt like fur but moved like liquid darkness. Braxton. The shadows recoiled from her touch. The creature that had been Braxton made a sound between a growl and a sob. Dulce felt him trying to pull away from her, trying to protect her from himself, but she held on. "I'm here," she said, keeping her voice steady even though her heart was hammering. "I'm here and I'm not leaving. Run." The word was barely human, forced through a throat restructured for violence. "Dulce. Run." "No. I'll kill you." "Can't control the shadows. They won't hurt me." Dulce moved closer, found what she thought was his face. Massive, distorted, but still somehow Braxton beneath the curse's overlay. "Listen to me. This isn't natural. Someone is doing this to you. Alara's family. They're channeling magic to force the transformation." A roar of rage and pain. The shadows around them writhed. "Focus," Dulce commanded. "Feel what I'm feeling. The magic isn't coming from inside you. It's being pushed into you from external sources. 4 of them. Positioned around the courtyard." She sensed Braxton's awareness sharpening, felt him grasp at the thread of clarity she was offering. The beast's breathing slowed fractionally. "Can you feel them?" Dulce asked. A grunt that might have been yes. "Then fight back. Not against the curse, against the magic controlling it. Push it out. Can't too strong. You can." Dulce pressed both hands against his massive chest, felt the wild hammering of his transformed heart. "You're stronger than you think. And you're not alone." Around them she heard guards approaching. Heard someone, probably Alara, ordering them to subdue the beast. To protect the people. To do whatever was necessary. They were going to kill him. Would call it mercy, call it duty, call it necessary for the kingdom's safety. And Braxton, lost in the curse's grip, wouldn't be able to defend himself without proving them right. "Braxton." Dulce grabbed what she thought were his shoulders. Massive, corded with unnatural muscle. "I need you to trust me. One more time. Can you do that?" A shudder ran through him. Then barely audible. "Yes. The shadows respond to me. We know they do. But we also know they respond to you. You've been controlling them for years." Dulce's hands moved to what felt like his face, cupping the distorted features gently. "So let's control them together. Feel where I'm touching you. Feel how the shadows quiet. Now push that feeling outward. Extend it. Use my touch as an anchor and pull yourself back." "Impossible. You said I was impossible. You said I shouldn't be able to perceive shadows at all." Dulce smiled even though she wanted to cry. "We're both impossible. So let's do something impossible together." For a moment nothing happened. Then Dulce felt it. A shift in the shadows pattern. Braxton was fighting. Not against the curse, but against the external magic trying to control it. Using her touch as a focal point, he started pushing back the channeled energy, rejecting the manipulation. The beast's form shuddered, started to shrink. That's it, Dulce encouraged. Keep going. You're doing it. But the magic users weren't giving up. Dulce felt them intensify their channeling, pouring more power into Braxton, trying to overwhelm his resistance. The transformation reversed course. The beast grew larger, more volatile. Braxton's control was slipping. Dulce. His voice was pure desperation now. Leave. Before I. No. I'm begging you. Can't hold it. I'm going to hurt you. Then hurt me. Dulce pulled his massive head down until their foreheads touched. I'd rather die here with you than live knowing I ran when you needed me. You're insane. You called me a mistake. You pushed me away. You married another woman. Dulce's voice broke. And I'm still here. Yes, I'm completely insane. The beast made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Around them, the guards were closing in. Dulce heard crossbows being loaded, heard commanders shouting orders to aim for the creature's heart. They had seconds at most. Braxton, Dulce whispered. Do you trust me? With my life. Good. She pressed her hands flat against his chest again. Because I'm going to do something really stupid, and I need you to not fight me. Before he could respond, Dulce opened herself completely to the shadows. She'd been holding them at bay for years, using her perception to navigate them while maintaining careful barriers. Now she dropped every defense and let them rush in. Let them see through her eyes, feel through her touch, experience her emotions without filter. Let them know exactly what she felt for the cursed king they were consuming. The shadows flooded into her like ice water. Dulce gasped at the impact, felt them writhing through her consciousness, searching, questioning, hungry for connection, for understanding, for someone who could perceive them as more than mindless hunger. See, Dulce told them. See what he means. See what you're destroying. The shadows hesitated. Dulce showed them Braxton holding her face in the garden. Showed them his hands trembling with restraint. Showed them his voice calling her beautiful. His promises to keep her safe. His anguish when he'd pushed her away. Showed them that the man they were tearing apart was the same man who'd been fighting them, not from hatred, but from a desperate need to protect everyone around him. He's not your enemy, Dulce told them. He never was. And neither am I. The shadows stilled. Then, slowly, they began to withdraw from Braxton. Not banished or suppressed, but choosing to retreat. Releasing their grip on his transformation. Pulling back from the forced manifestation. The beast collapsed. Dulce went down with him, her hands still pressed against his chest. She felt the curse receding, felt Braxton's body shifting back toward human, felt the external magic finally lose its grip as the shadows it had been manipulating stopped cooperating. Guards surrounded them instantly. Dulce heard weapons drawn, heard commanders demanding explanations. Stand down. The voice was Braxton's, rough, exhausted but human. Lower your weapons immediately. Your Majesty, the creature is gone. The woman saved me. And if anyone harms her, they'll answer to me personally. Dulce felt Braxton's hand, normal-sized human, cover hers where it rested on his chest. Felt his heartbeat steadying beneath her palm. You came back, he said hoarsely. You called me a mistake, Dulce replied. I wanted to prove you wrong. Braxton made a sound between a laugh and a groan. I lied. I lied about everything. I pushed you away because I thought. I know. Lyra told me. Dulce smiled weakly. We can discuss your terrible decision-making later. Right now, we need to deal with the people who tried to kill you. Already handled, a new voice said, cold, furious, and unexpected. Dulce recognized it a heartbeat later. Princess Ilara. Guards, Ilara commanded. Arrest my uncle and his co-conspirators. The 4 mages positioned around the courtyard. Seize them immediately. Surprised shouts, running footsteps, the sounds of brief struggle and then surrender. Princess, one of the guards asked, confused. You knew. I suspected, Ilara said crisply. Why do you think I insisted on a sunset ceremony despite the king's objections? I needed my family to commit to their plan publicly where we could catch them in the act. Her voice softened fractionally. I'm many things, but I'm not a traitor. And I don't appreciate being used as a pawn in someone else's coup. Dulce heard Braxton sit up slowly. You knew they'd try this. I knew they were planning something. I didn't know exactly what until your blind girl returned and started shouting about external magic. Ilara's footsteps approached. Quite the dramatic entrance, by the way. Very theatrical. I wasn't trying to be theatrical, Dulce said. I was trying to stop him from being murdered. Mission accomplished. Ilara's hand touched Dulce's shoulder briefly. And for what it's worth, I appreciate the effort. I may have been willing to help catch my family's conspirators, but I'm not capable of communicating with curses the way you apparently are. About the wedding, Braxton began. Is obviously cancelled, Ilara interrupted. I agreed to this political arrangement to help you stabilize the kingdom, not to marry a man clearly in love with someone else. My pride has limits, and being the consolation prize isn't within them. I'm not. Braxton stopped. We never said. You didn't have to. Ilara's voice held dry amusement. The entire kingdom watched you choose her over controlling your curse. Watched her walk into certain death rather than leave you. That's not exactly subtle political messaging. Dulce felt her face flush. I didn't mean to cause a scandal. Scandals can be useful. And this one serves my purposes perfectly. Ilara's footsteps moved away. I'll make a statement that I dissolved the betrothal after discovering the conspiracy, that King Braxton acted heroically under impossible circumstances, and that his mysterious companion displayed remarkable courage in protecting her king. The nobles will gossip for months, but the narrative will focus on the conspiracy's failure rather than the crown's weakness. Thank you, Braxton said quietly. Don't thank me yet. You still need to deal with the mess your curse created, the political fallout from a failed assassination, and the question of what to do with a woman who can apparently pacify shadows through sheer stubbornness. Ilara paused at the edge of hearing. I recommend keeping her close. People who walk into monsters to save you are rare. Losing one would be incredibly foolish. Then she was gone, leaving Dulce and Braxton surrounded by guards, scattered nobles, and the wreckage of a ceremony that had gone spectacularly wrong. Well, Dulce said into the silence. That could have gone worse. Braxton's hand tightened on hers. I thought I'd lost you. You did. You pushed me away, remember? I was trying to protect you from being weaponized by your enemies. No. Lyra explained. Dulce turned toward where she thought his face was. But next time you decide to sacrifice yourself to keep me safe, maybe talk to me first? Because running toward you while you're transforming into a monster was significantly more dangerous than anything you were protecting me from. There won't be a next time, Braxton promised. I'm never pushing you away again. Good. Because I'm a terrible runner and hunting you down twice would be exhausting. Braxton laughed. Actually laughed and pulled her against his chest. Dulce felt his heartbeat still racing, felt the tremors of exhaustion running through him, felt the shadows still swirling but no longer hostile. You're impossible, he whispered against her hair. You've mentioned that before. And you're brilliant and brave and completely insane. Also previously mentioned. And I love you. Dulce's breath caught. That's new. Is it? Braxton's hand cupped her face gently. I've been terrible at showing it, but Dulce, I've loved you since you told me my shadows were sad instead of evil. Since you saw beauty where everyone else saw only danger. Since you chose to stay when leaving would have been easier. Even when I was a mistake. Dulce asked, unable to stop herself. Especially then. Because calling you a mistake was the biggest lie I've ever told. Braxton's thumb brushed her cheek. You're the best decision I never intended to make. And if you'll let me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life proving that. Around them, Dulce heard the remaining crowd beginning to whisper. Heard guards trying to restore order. Heard the distant sounds of the conspirators being led away. The kingdom was watching. The nobles were judging. The political implications were staggering. Dulce didn't care. She reached up, found Braxton's face, and pulled him down to kiss her. The shadows, for once, were absolutely silent. The throne room was silent except for Braxton's ragged breathing. Dulce stood at the entrance, feeling the weight of 100 courtiers' stares. She'd been escorted here directly from the courtyard. No time to change from her dust-covered traveling clothes, no opportunity to prepare herself for what came next. The guards had been respectful but insistent. The king demanded her presence immediately. She could feel him at the far end of the hall. Could sense the shadows still clinging to him, agitated and hungry despite his return to human form. The transformation in the courtyard had only been forced back, not resolved. The curse remained, coiled tight around his soul, waiting for another opportunity to erupt. "Leave us." Braxton's voice was steady but strained. "Everyone out. Now." "Your Majesty," someone protested. Dulce thought it might be the head counselor. "After what happened, you shouldn't be alone with." "I said leave." The authority in those two words sent a ripple through the assembled court. Dulce heard the rustle of fabric, the shuffle of reluctant footsteps, whispered conversations hastily cut short. Within moments, the throne room emptied except for her and Braxton. And the shadows. They seethed at the edges of Dulce's perception, more agitated than she'd ever felt them. The forced transformation had damaged something in their relationship with Braxton, broken the careful balance he'd maintained through years of rigid control. Now they pressed against him constantly, testing his defenses, seeking cracks in his composure. "You shouldn't have come back." Braxton's voice came from across the hall, rougher than usual. "It's not safe." "I'm not safe." "I noticed." Dulce started walking toward him, trailing her hand along the wall for guidance. "You transformed into a monster in front of thousands of people, nearly got yourself killed by your future in-laws' conspiracy, and apparently still haven't learned that pushing me away doesn't actually protect me." "Dulce." "No." She kept walking, steady and deliberate. "You don't get to make that decision for me anymore. You don't get to decide I'm safer away from you. You don't get to sacrifice yourself to spare me from danger. You saw what I become. What the curse makes me." Pain threaded through every word. "How can you stand to be near me after that?" Dulce reached the dais where the throne sat and stopped, tilting her head toward where she sensed him standing just to the side. "Because I've always seen what you become. The shadows have never been invisible to me, remember? I felt every transformation, every struggle, every moment you fought to maintain control." She took another step forward. "I've known the monster since the day we met. And I chose you anyway. That's insane." "You keep saying that." Dulce smiled despite the tension crackling through the air. "But I think you're starting to like my particular brand of insanity." Sound between a laugh and a groan. "Like isn't the word I'd use." "Then what word would you use?" Silence. Dulce felt the shadows surge, felt Braxton's control slipping as emotion threatened to overwhelm his careful restraint. She heard his breathing quicken, heard the throne room's temperature drop as darkness condensed around him. "Braxton." Dulce closed the remaining distance between them. "I need you to answer something honestly. The riddle I gave you in the garden, about what's invisible but changes everything. Did you ever figure out the answer?" "I thought," his voice broke. "I thought it was hope, or faith, or some philosophical concept about perception versus reality. It wasn't." Dulce reached out carefully, searching for him. Her hand found his chest, found his heart hammering beneath her palm. The answer was never that complicated. It was always simple. Always obvious. "Then tell me." "No." Dulce's other hand found his face, traced the sharp line of his jaw, the tension in his clenched teeth. "You have to figure it out yourself. Because if I tell you it won't break the curse. Has to be real. It has to be something you discover, not something I give you. I don't understand. Yes, you do. Dulce moved closer until she could feel his breath on her face. You've always understood. You just didn't trust it. Didn't believe it could be that simple. The shadows writhed violently. Dulce felt them pushing against her, testing whether she'd retreat, whether fear would finally drive her away. She held her ground. Tell me what you see, Braxton whispered desperately. When you look at me, when you perceive me, what do you see? Everything. Dulce's hands framed his face. I see a man who's been fighting himself for years because he's terrified of hurting people. I see someone who cares so deeply about protecting others that he's willing to destroy his own happiness to keep them safe. I see strength and kindness and terrible loneliness wrapped up in shadow and stubbornness. Her voice softened. I see the person I love in every form he takes. Braxton went absolutely still. What did you say? I love you. The words came easier the second time. I love you when you're human and when you're monstrous. I love you when you're pushing me away to protect me and when you're pulling me close because you can't help yourself. I love the man who calls me beautiful and the beast who's terrified of hurting me. I love all of you, Braxton. Every impossible piece. You can't. But his hands had come up to cover hers where they rested on his face. You don't know what you're saying. The curse, it makes me. It makes you afraid, Dulce interrupted gently. It makes you fight yourself. But it doesn't make you a monster. You're only a monster when you believe you are. Everyone saw what Ilara's family forced you to become. What happens when external magic manipulates the curse beyond your control? Dulce's thumbs brushed his cheekbones. But I felt you transform before, Braxton. I felt you lose control in private. And you know what I've never felt? Malice, cruelty, the desire to hurt anyone except yourself. That doesn't make it safe. Nothing worth having is completely safe. Dulce smiled, feeling tears gathering in her sightless eyes. I'm a blind girl who perceives shadows and talks to curses. You're a cursed king who transforms into nightmares. We're both impossible. We're both dangerous. And we're both so terrified of being monsters that we forget we're also human. The shadows around them had gone eerily quiet. Braxton's hands trembled against hers. I don't know how to fix this. The curse, it's getting stronger. The forced transformation broke something. I can barely hold it back anymore. Then stop holding it back. What? Stop fighting it. Dulce leaned her forehead against his. You've spent years trying to suppress the curse, control it, contain it. But that's not how magic works. The more you fight it, the stronger it becomes. The more you fear it, the more power you give it. If I stop fighting, you won't lose control. Not if you stop seeing it as an enemy. Dulce's hands moved to his chest again, pressing flat over his racing heart. The shadows respond to emotion, Braxton. They feed on fear and anger and desperation. But they also respond to acceptance. To trust. To. She stopped, understanding flooding through her. To love, she finished quietly. That's why they come around me. Not because I'm special or magical or cursed. Because I don't fear them. Because I see them as part of you instead of separate from you. You're saying the curse breaks if I love it. Braxton sounded skeptical. I'm saying the curse breaks when you stop seeing yourself as monstrous. Dulce pulled his face down until their noses nearly touched. When you believe you're worthy of being loved, shadows and all. When you accept that being cursed doesn't make you a curse. That's impossible. We've established that I specialize in impossible things. Dulce's smile was tremulous. But I can't do this one alone. I can love you with everything I have, but you have to love yourself too. You have to believe you deserve it. Around them, the shadows were beginning to change. Dulce felt their texture shifting from hungry and aggressive to something gentler, curious, almost hopeful. Braxton felt it too. She heard his sharp intake of breath, felt his hands tighten on hers. I don't know if I can, he admitted. Believe I deserve you. Deserve happiness. deserve anything except punishment for what I am. Then let me believe it for both of us until you catch up. Dulce rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. Soft, certain, absolute. For a heartbeat nothing happened. Then light exploded through the throne room. Dulce gasped as warmth flooded through her body. Not the cold rush of shadow magic, but something bright and fierce and alive. She felt Braxton jolt against her. Felt the shadows around them scream in voices that sounded almost relieved. The curse was breaking. She felt it unraveling like thread pulled from a tapestry. Felt the magic that had wrapped around Braxton's soul for years finally loosening its grip. The shadows didn't disappear. They were part of him, intrinsic to who he was, but they changed. Transformed from parasitic to symbiotic. From weapon to tool. From curse to gift. Braxton made a sound against her mouth. Wonder and pain and overwhelming relief. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her tight against him as light continued to pour from their joined bodies. When it finally faded, Dulce found herself trembling in Braxton's embrace. Dulce. His voice was different. Lighter, younger, as though a weight he'd carried for years had finally lifted. Look at me. Please look at me. I am looking at you, she said, confused. I'm always looking at you. No. His hands framed her face with infinite gentleness. Open your eyes. Actually open them. Dulce realized with a start that her eyes had been squeezed shut against the burst of light. Slowly, cautiously, she opened them. And saw light. Not the shadow perception she was used to. Not the texture and sound navigation she'd developed. Actual light. Dim and blurry and overwhelming in its brightness. She blinked rapidly, trying to process the input her brain had never learned to interpret. Shapes resolved gradually from the blur. Colors she could only name theoretically started to make sense. And directly in front of her, close enough to touch, was a face. Braxton's face. The first face she'd ever seen. Dulce's breath caught. She raised a shaking hand to trace features she'd only known through touch. The strong line of his jaw, the sharp cheekbones, the eyes that were no longer black with cursed shadow but instead a clear, startling blue. You're beautiful, she whispered. Braxton laughed. Actually laughed, and she saw his smile for the first time. Saw how it transformed his whole face. How joy looked on someone who'd forgotten how to feel it. That's my line, he said. I've been calling you beautiful for months. I know. But now I can see that you were wrong. Dulce's vision was already starting to fade back to familiar darkness, but she held on to the memory of his face. Beautiful doesn't even come close. Her sight dimmed completely, leaving her in comfortable blackness again. But something had changed. The shadows were still there, she could still perceive them, but they felt different now. Peaceful. Like they'd finally found their purpose. Your eyes, Braxton said softly. They're glowing. Just for a moment they glowed silver. Did the curse break? Dulce asked. Can you feel it? It's still here. But it's changed. Braxton took her hand and pressed it to his chest. Feel. Dulce extended her senses and found the shadows still present in Braxton's core. But they were calm now. Integrated. No longer fighting for dominance but existing in harmony with the rest of him. The riddle, Braxton said quietly. The answer was love. It was always love. Yes. Not romantic platitudes or poetic philosophy. Actual love. Acceptance. Choosing to see the whole person instead of just their worst parts. Yes. You've been trying to teach me that since the beginning. You're a slow learner. Dulce smiled. But you got there eventually. Braxton pulled her close again, and Dulce felt safe in a way she never had before. Not because the danger was gone. She knew the shadows would always be part of their lives, knew their relationship would face challenges and complications and political consequences. But they would face them together. Your Majesty. The throne room doors burst open. The conspirators have confessed. Oh. The guard stopped abruptly, clearly startled to find his king embracing a blind girl in the middle of the empty throne room. What did they confess? Braxton asked without releasing Dulce. Everything, sire. Princess Ilara's uncle orchestrated the entire plot. He intended to force your transformation publicly, claim you were unfit to rule, and install himself as regent with Ilara as his puppet queen. He had been bribing shadow mages for months to amplify your curse's power. And Princess Ilara knew nothing. She discovered her uncle's conspiracy only days before the wedding and chose to help expose it rather than profit from it. She's requesting an audience to formally dissolve the betrothal and explain her actions. Grant it. And have the conspirators tried for treason immediately. Braxton paused. Also, send word to the kingdom that I'll be making an official announcement tomorrow. The curse has been broken, and there will be significant changes to how this kingdom treats both magic and those who possess it. The guard bowed and retreated. Dulce tilted her head up toward Braxton. Significant changes. Starting with making you my official advisor on magical affairs. I'm not qualified for that. You communicate with shadows and broke a generational curse through stubborn affection. You're the most qualified person in the kingdom. Braxton's hand cupped her cheek. Besides, I need someone around who will call me out when I'm being an idiot. You've proven excellent at that. True. Dulce leaned into his touch. What about Princess Ilara? I'll honor her request to dissolve the betrothal. And I'll make sure the kingdom knows she acted heroically in exposing the conspiracy. She deserves that much. She deserves more than that. She risked her own family for you. Then I'll find a way to repay her. Braxton was quiet for a moment. But right now I have more important priorities. Such as convincing a certain impossible blind girl to stay in the castle permanently. As my advisor. My friend. He stopped suddenly uncertain. Dulce smiled. You're what? I was going to say my love. But I don't know if that's presumptuous after everything I put you through. It's only presumptuous if you assume I haven't been planning to stay since the moment I walked into your monster form at the wedding. Dulce's fingers traced his jaw. I didn't come back to rescue you and then leave, Braxton. I came back to stay. Even though I'm still cursed. Even though the shadows will always be part of me. Especially because of that. Dulce pressed her palm over his heart. I like you shadowy. It makes you interesting. Braxton laughed and kissed her again. Gentle and thorough and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, Dulce sensed something had shifted in the throne room's atmosphere. The oppressive weight that had hung over the castle for years had lifted. In its place was something lighter. Hopeful. What happens now? She asked. Now. Braxton tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Now we rebuild. We expose the conspiracy completely, reform the laws about magic users, and make sure no one else in this kingdom suffers for gifts they can't control. His voice grew warmer. And we figure out how to explain to the council that their king is hopelessly in love with a commoner who perceives shadows and doesn't take orders well. They're going to hate that. They'll adjust. They don't have a choice. Dulce heard the steel beneath his words and smiled. Very kingly. I learned from the best. Braxton's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing naturally. A certain storyteller taught me that real strength isn't about control, it's about acceptance. About choosing courage over fear. I'm a terrible role model. You're perfect. They stood together in the silent throne room, shadows and light swirling peacefully around them. Outside, Dulce could hear the castle stirring back to life, servants whispering about what had happened, guards reorganizing after the chaos, nobles positioning themselves for whatever came next. Let them whisper. Let them scheme. Let them judge. She had faced monsters and conspiracies and impossible curses. She had walked into certain death to save a man the world called cursed. She had loved without reservation and been loved in return. She had been called blind her entire life. But for the first time, Dulce felt truly seen. 3 months later, the throne room was packed for Braxton's address to the assembled nobility. Dulce stood at the edge of the dais, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes watching her. She'd been introduced as the king's chief advisor on magical affairs, a title that had caused considerable controversy among the more traditional nobles. Blind commoner, advising the king. Unthinkable. They'd adjust. The reforms are comprehensive, Braxton was saying, his voice carrying easily through the hall. All citizens with magical abilities will be registered not as threats but as resources. They will be offered training, support, and equal protection under the law. Those who have been persecuted for their gifts will receive reparations. Those who have hidden their abilities in fear will be welcomed into society openly. Murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles, some approving, many skeptical. Additionally, Braxton continued, I'm establishing a council specifically dedicated to magical affairs. This council will be chaired by someone many of you have already met, the woman who saved my life during the attempted coup. The woman who has demonstrated more understanding of complex magic than anyone in this kingdom. He turned toward Dulce, extending his hand. She took it and stepped forward. Some of you have questioned her qualifications, Braxton said calmly. Some have suggested that her blindness makes her unsuitable for such an important position. I would remind those people that this woman perceived a conspiracy that fooled trained guards and experienced mages. She navigated magical attacks that would have killed anyone else. She broke a generational curse that defeated decades of scholars. His hand tightened on hers. She is the most qualified person I know. And anyone who suggests otherwise is welcome to test their magical perception against hers. I promise you'll lose. Dulce sensed the throne room's atmosphere shift. Some nobles were calculating new political angles. Others were reassessing their previous judgments. A few, just a few, were beginning to understand. I have one more announcement, Braxton said. Princess Ilara of the southern provinces has been cleared of all suspicion regarding her family's conspiracy. She acted heroically in exposing the plot, and I have formally recommended her for a position leading our diplomatic corps. She has agreed, and will begin her work establishing better relationships with our neighboring kingdoms immediately. Polite applause. Ilara, standing among the nobles, inclined her head gracefully. Finally, Braxton said, I want to address the rumors that have been circulating about my relationship with my chief advisor. The throne room went silent. Dulce's heart started beating faster. They'd agreed to keep their personal relationship private for now. Let the nobles adjust to her position before adding romantic complications. But she recognized the tone in Braxton's voice. He was about to do something impulsive. The rumors are true, Braxton said calmly. I am courting Dulce with the intention of making her my queen. Whispers. One noble actually fainted. Dulce turned toward Braxton, momentarily speechless. You said we were waiting, she hissed under her breath. I changed my mind. He smiled down at her, unconcerned with the chaos erupting around them. You taught me that hiding truth to avoid complications is cowardly. So I'm being brave. This isn't brave. This is insane. You say that like it's a bad thing. Despite everything, Dulce laughed. Around them, the throne room descended into controlled chaos. Nobles arguing, advisors conferring frantically, guards looking uncertain about whether this was a security issue. Braxton raised his hand for silence. I understand this announcement is unconventional, he said once the noise died down. I understand many of you have concerns about bloodlines and tradition and proper protocol. Those concerns are noted. However, I would remind this court that the woman you're objecting to saved my life, helped expose a conspiracy that would have destroyed this kingdom, and demonstrated more courage and wisdom than many people born to privilege. He looked around the room, meeting eyes steadily. If you cannot accept her as my choice, you're welcome to voice your objections through proper channels. But know this, I will not change my mind. I will not be swayed by tradition or politics or fear of scandal. I have spent my entire life making decisions based on what others thought I should do. That ends today. The throne room was silent. Then, from the back of the hall, someone began to clap. It was Ilara. She stepped forward, her applause slow and deliberate. "Well said, Your Majesty," she called. "It's about time you prioritized happiness over politics." Other nobles joined her, slowly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Not everyone, not even half, but enough to matter. Dulce felt Braxton's relief like a physical thing. "Thank you," he said quietly to the assembled court. "This session is adjourned. We'll reconvene tomorrow to discuss the magical reforms in detail." The nobles dispersed, still whispering among themselves. Dulce sensed the ones who were furious, the ones who were calculating new strategies, the ones who were genuinely pleased. Politics would be complicated for a while. She didn't care. "That was dramatic," she said once they were relatively alone. "I learned from you." Braxton pulled her close. "Besides, I'm tired of hiding what you mean to me. Tired of pretending our relationship is purely professional when everyone can see it isn't. They'll make it difficult. They'll adjust." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "And the ones who don't will learn to keep their objections quiet." Dulce leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the peaceful swirl of shadows that now complemented rather than consumed him. "I love you," she said simply. "I know." Braxton smiled against her hair. "You walked into a monster to tell me that, remember? Hard to forget. You'd better not forget. I'm never doing it again." "Good. Once was terrifying enough." They stood together in the emptying throne room, and Dulce thought about the journey that had brought them here. She'd arrived at the castle expecting to die within days. Expected to be another casualty of a cursed king's darkness. Instead, she'd found someone who saw her strength instead of her disability. Found someone who valued her perception over her sight. Found someone who loved her not despite her impossibility but because of it. And in return, she'd given him the same gift. Had seen his shadows not as monsters to fear but as part of a complex, beautiful whole. "What are you thinking?" Braxton asked softly. "That we're both impossible," Dulce said. "And I'm glad." "Me too." He kissed her then, gentle and certain and full of promise. Around them, the shadows danced peacefully, no longer fighting for dominance but celebrating their integration. Dulce had spent her life being called cursed, called broken, called less than because she couldn't see the way others saw. But standing in Braxton's arms, surrounded by peaceful shadows and hard-won hope, she finally understood the truth. She wasn't broken. She'd never been broken. She simply saw the world differently. Saw beauty in darkness, strength in vulnerability, love in the spaces others called monstrous. And Braxton saw her the same way. Clearly, completely, without reservation. Some people needed eyes to see truth. They had something better. They had each other. 5 years later, the children gathered in the garden as the sun set, settling onto cushions arranged in a semicircle. They came from all over the kingdom, nobles and commoners, humans and shifters, those with magic and those without. All were welcome in the Queen's story circle. Dulce sat in her usual spot beneath the old oak tree, her fingers trailing over the pages of a book she'd written herself. She could read it by touch now. Had learned the raised letter technique from a traveling scholar years ago and adapted it for her own use. But she didn't need the book tonight. This story she knew by heart. "Tell us about the curse," one of the children called. A little shifter girl whose parents had moved to the capital after the reforms made it safe to live openly. "And the conspiracy," added a noble's son who'd befriended the shifter girl despite his parents' initial objections. Dulce smiled. "Very well. But you have to promise not to have nightmares. This story has monsters." "We're not scared of monsters," several children chorused. "Good. Because the best stories have monsters that aren't really monsters at all." She felt Braxton's presence before she heard him, sensed his shadows mingling with hers as he approached the story circle. He settled onto the cushion beside her, and their daughter immediately climbed into his lap. "Is this the story about how you saved Papa?" the little girl asked. "No," Dulce corrected gently. "This is the story about how we saved each other." She began to speak, weaving the tale of a cursed king and a blind girl who saw what no one else could see. The children listened, rapt, as the story unfolded. The conspiracy, the transformation, the wedding chaos. When she reached the part about walking into the monster, Braxton's hand found hers. "You were terrified," he murmured under his breath. "Absolutely," Dulce agreed. "But I did it anyway. That's what makes you brave." She squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of his touch, the peaceful swirl of shadows that accompanied him everywhere now. The curse had been broken, but the shadows remained, a gift rather than a burden, power he'd learned to wield with precision and grace. Their daughter looked up at Braxton with eyes that shifted between blue and silver depending on the light. "Did the monster hurt Mama?" "Never," Braxton said firmly. "Even at my worst, I would never have hurt her. Because she loved you. Because love changes everything," Dulce finished. "It doesn't fix everything. We still had to work hard to rebuild the kingdom and help people understand that being different isn't the same as being dangerous. But love gave us the courage to try." The children absorbed this solemnly. "One more question," a boy in the back raised his hand. "If you can't see, how did you know the king was handsome?" Dulce laughed. "Who says I can't see? I see differently than you do, but that doesn't mean I don't see." She reached over and ruffled her daughter's hair. "And I know your father is handsome because beauty isn't just about how someone looks. It's about how they make you feel, how they treat people, how they choose courage over fear." "Also, I told her I was handsome," Braxton added with a grin. "Repeatedly." "He was very insistent about it," Dulce agreed. The children giggled, and Dulce felt a surge of contentment. These story circles, this mingling of different people learning to see each other as equals, this was what they'd fought for. What they continued to fight for every day through policy and patience and persistent optimism. The kingdom had changed dramatically in 5 years. Not perfectly. There were still nobles who objected to a blind commoner as queen, still villages where shifters faced suspicion, still pockets of resistance to the magical reforms. But change was happening, one story at a time. One friendship between unlikely children. One generation learning that different didn't mean dangerous. "Time for bed," Dulce announced as the last light faded from the sky. "Same time next week." The children groaned but dispersed, their parents collecting them with smiles and thanks. Braxton and Dulce remained in the garden as the stars emerged overhead. "You're good at this," Braxton said quietly. "At telling stories. At changing the world one heart at a time." He pulled her close. "At making people see possibility instead of limitation. I had a good teacher." Dulce tilted her face up toward his. "Someone taught me that curses can become gifts if you change your perspective. That someone sounds very wise." "He has his moments." Braxton laughed and kissed her, soft and familiar and still capable of making her heart race after 5 years of marriage. Their daughter made a gagging sound from where she'd been playing nearby. "Gross. You're always kissing." "We are," Dulce agreed cheerfully. "Get used to it." The little girl ran off, giggling, and Dulce leaned into Braxton's embrace. Around them, the garden shadows swirled peacefully, and somewhere in the distance, the city bells rang the evening hour. "Do you ever regret it?" Braxton asked. "Choosing this life? The politics and complications and constant scrutiny?" "Never." Dulce's answer was immediate and certain. "Do you?" "Not once." His arms tightened around her. "Though I sometimes wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been brave enough to stay that first night. If you'd run when you had the chance. I'd probably be living a quiet life in some distant village, writing stories about cursed kings and wondering what might have been." Dulce smiled. "So thank you for being interesting enough to make staying more appealing than running. I think you mean thank you for being cursed and dangerous and politically complicated." "That too." They stood together as the night deepened, and Dulce thought about all the impossible things they'd accomplished. Breaking a generational curse. Exposing a conspiracy. Reforming a kingdom. building a life together despite every obstacle society and circumstance could throw at them. And the most impossible thing of all, they'd learned to see each other completely, without reservation, without fear. He saw her courage where others saw limitation. She saw his humanity where others saw monster. And together, they saw a future where being different was celebrated instead of condemned, where curses could become gifts, where a blind girl and a shadow king could build something beautiful from the broken pieces of their pasts. "I love you," Braxton whispered against her hair. "I know," Dulce replied, echoing his words from years ago. "You walk into throne rooms full of hostile nobles to declare it publicly. Hard to forget. I'll keep doing it too. Every day if I have to. I'd prefer you didn't. The nobles are testy enough already." Braxton laughed, and the sound echoed across the garden, warm and alive and completely human. Dulce closed her sightless eyes and listened to his heartbeat, felt the peaceful shadows, sensed their daughter playing in the distance and the city settling into evening routines beyond the castle walls. She'd been told her entire life that being blind meant she couldn't see what mattered. They'd been wrong. She saw everything that mattered. She saw love in the spaces between heartbeats, saw strength in vulnerability, saw beauty in shadows and hope in impossible circumstances. She saw him and he saw her, more clearly than sight ever could. And that was the only vision either of them needed.